I found my own obituary. I found my own obituary in my husband's drawer. The date of my death was scheduled for 3 days later. He had been slowly poisoning me for 3 years. Hello, my name is Temperance Holloway, and today I'm 75 years old. Before I begin my story, I'd like to ask you to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I want to know who's listening to my story. I'm going to tell you about something that happened to me in 1971 when I was 48 years old. A story that seems like it's from a movie, but was my reality. You know when you think you completely know someone after spending more than 2 decades with that person? Well, sometimes we're wrong. I lived in Millfield, a historic town in Virginia. It was a simple life, but dignified. I had been married for 22 years to Walter, who owned the town's general store, and I was mother to Vincent, who was 17 years old at the time. Our house was 2 blocks from the main church. Every Sunday we went to service, then had family lunch together. Everyone in town saw us as an exemplary family. Mrs. Temperance and Mr. Walter, what a beautiful couple, they would say. Walter was respected in town, a businessman, always well-dressed in his brown suit and hat. He woke up early every day, went to the store, and returned home for dinner. I took care of the house, cooked, embroidered, and sometimes helped at the store counter when he needed to take care of something else. Vincent studied at the local high school, was a well-mannered boy who got good grades and dreamed of becoming a lawyer. Those were different times. We didn't have cell phones, internet, all these things everyone has today. My son can't believe it when I tell him our telephone was one of those heavy black ones that sat on a special table in the living room. And when it rang, the whole town knew someone was calling the Holloway house. But everything changed on that day, March 12th, 1971. It was a Friday. I remember it as if it were yesterday. The sky was cloudy, threatening rain. Walter had gone to handle some business in Crestwood, the neighboring town. He said he'd return only at the end of the day. I took advantage of the opportunity to do a thorough cleaning of the house, something he didn't like when he was home, because he said the noise bothered him. I was looking for some documents about the land we had purchased the previous year. We needed them to finalize the registration at the county clerk's office. I searched all the dresser drawers, the wardrobe, the document boxes. Nothing. Then I remembered that Walter had a desk in the bedroom with a drawer that was always locked. He kept the key on top of the wardrobe in a porcelain pot that had belonged to his mother. I got a chair, climbed up, and reached for the pot. Inside was the small golden key. I hesitated for a moment. I had never opened that drawer before. Walter said he kept important store documents there, things that weren't my business. Back then, we respected that kind of thing. Husbands had their business secrets, and wives didn't interfere. But I needed those land papers. So I put the key in the lock and turned it. The drawer opened with a creak. Inside were several organized folders, receipts, accounting books, and at the bottom, a large brown envelope with my name written in big letters, Temperance Holloway. My heart raced. Why would there be an envelope with my name in my husband's secret drawer? I opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside were several documents. The first was a contract with Harrison Funeral Home. I read the heading and almost fainted. Funeral Services Contract. It was a complete contract, everything detailed and paid for. Cedar coffin with golden handles, wreath of flowers, candles, viewing room, funeral transport, everything. My legs weakened. I sat on the bed to continue reading. The second document was even worse, a partially filled out death certificate. My full name, date of birth, parents' names, marital status, all correct. Only the date and time of death were missing, but the cause of death was already filled out in the handwriting of Dr. Mitchell, a doctor friend of Walter's. Cardiac arrest following prolonged illness. What illness? I wasn't sick. Yes, I had been feeling tired in recent years, with occasional dizziness, but I thought it was just the weight of age and housework. Dr. Mitchell had been visiting me monthly, saying I had a weak heart and prescribing rest. The third document was a handwritten letter by Walter. It said, "Dear friends and family, Today we say goodbye to my beloved wife, Temperance. For years she bravely fought against her illness, but God wanted to take her to be with Him. I thank you for the prayers and support during this difficult time. I could barely breathe. I leafed through more papers, a receipt from the town cemetery for a perpetual grave, instructions on how to dress my body in my blue lace dress, the one I only wore on special occasions, even a list of people to be invited to the wake. And then, on the last paper, I found something written in pencil in the top corner. Expected date, March 15th, 1971. It was 3 days away. My own husband had planned my death. He had everything prepared, every detail, as one would organize a party or a trip. But it was my funeral he was planning with a set date. At that moment, my world collapsed. More than 2 decades of marriage, an entire life built together, our son. And Walter wanted to kill me. Why? What had I done to deserve this? With trembling hands, and my heart nearly jumping out of my chest, I put everything back in the envelope. I closed the drawer and returned the key to the porcelain pot. I needed to think. I couldn't let Walter notice that I had discovered his plan. For the past 3 years, every night before bed, Walter would bring me a tea. He said it was chamomile with lemon balm from our backyard to help me sleep. He was always attentive. "Drink this, Temperance. It will do you good. You need to rest." And I, foolish woman, would thank him for his kindness. I drank it all down to the last drop. After the tea, I always felt strange, too drowsy, sometimes confused. In the morning, I would wake up with a heavy head, dry mouth. I thought it was just fatigue, perhaps age catching up with me. Now it all made sense. He had been poisoning me slowly. That night, when Walter returned, I pretended nothing had happened. We had dinner as a family, as always. Vincent talked about school. Walter spoke about his business in Crestwood. I smiled, participated in the conversation, but inside I was shattered. I looked at that man in front of me, the father of my son, my companion of so many years, and I didn't recognize him anymore. Who was this stranger planning my death? After dinner, as usual, Walter went to the living room to listen to the radio. It was the news program he never missed. Vincent went to his room to study. I stayed in the kitchen washing the dishes, thinking about what to do. I knew I needed help, but who would believe me? The respected shopkeeper Walter, wanting to kill his own wife? It seemed crazy. Later, Walter appeared in the kitchen with a steaming cup. "Your tea, Temperance," he smiled. That same smile as always now seemed sinister to me. I took the cup, thanked him. He stood there, watching me. "Aren't you going to drink it?" he asked. I brought the cup to my lips, pretending to drink. "It's too hot," I said. "I'll wait for it to cool down a bit." He nodded, satisfied, and went back to the living room. As soon as he left, I poured the tea down the sink. I needed to know what was in that drink. I saved a little in an empty medicine bottle. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay there, eyes closed, pretending to sleep. Walter snored beside me. How could he sleep so peacefully, knowing what he planned to do? With each snore, I felt more anger, more fear, more determination. I wasn't going to die. I wasn't going to let him win. The next morning, Saturday, I told Walter I was going to visit my sister Constance. He didn't like me visiting her. He said she was a gossip, that she put ideas in my head. But that morning, he didn't protest. Perhaps he thought, let her go. In 3 days she'll be dead anyway. Constance lived on the other side of town. I told her everything, showing her the bottle with the tea. At first, she didn't believe me. "Walter, it can't be. He's always been so good to you." She insisted that I must be confusing things, that perhaps the documents were just a precaution, that businessmen are forward-thinking. "Precaution with a set date, Constance? 3 days from now? And this tea he gives me every night? Why does he watch me until I drink it all?" She finally began to consider the possibility. Her husband, my brother-in-law John, was a truck driver and was away on a trip. We decided to go to Mr. Anderson's pharmacy, an elderly gentleman who knew everyone in town. Mr. Anderson greeted us with his usual kind smile. He was a short man with thick glasses and thin white hair. His white apron always impeccable. I explained that my dog had drunk something strange and was very drowsy. I showed him the liquid in the small bottle. Could he analyze it? The old pharmacist smelled it, then put a drop on a glass slide and observed it against the light. He did some tests with reagents. "Where did your dog drink this, Mrs. Holloway?" His tone was serious. I hesitated. Then I decided to tell part of the truth. "It's a tea I found at home." He looked at me over his glasses. "This isn't just tea. There's phenobarbital here, a lot of phenobarbital. It's a medicine for epilepsy, but in such a high dose like this, it could kill a person over time. It weakens the heart, causes mental confusion. You didn't give this to your dog, did you?" I shook my head. "No, Mr. Anderson. I don't have a dog." He understood. He didn't ask any more questions, just said quietly, "Be careful, Mrs. Holloway. Very careful." I left the pharmacy determined. I needed more evidence. I remembered that in the drawer there was also the funeral home contract. Harrison Funeral Home was near the main church. It was closed. It was Saturday afternoon, but I knew the owner, Mr. Jerome. He lived in the back. I knocked on the back door. Mr. Jerome answered, surprised to see me. "Mrs. Holloway, is there a problem?" I explained that I needed to verify some information about a contract. He hesitated. He didn't usually work on weekends, but he ended up inviting me in. In the small office behind the funeral home, surrounded by empty coffins leaning against the walls, a vision that gave me chills. I asked to see the contracts in the name of Walter Holloway. Mr. Jerome furrowed his brow, but went to the file cabinet and pulled out a thick folder, very thick. "What exactly do you want to know, Mrs. Holloway? How many funeral contracts has my husband made?" He leafed through the papers. "Well, Mr. Holloway has been coming every year since 1965, always in March. He makes the contract, pays everything in advance, chooses the coffin, the flowers, all top quality. Then, in April, he comes and cancels. He loses the deposit but says that, thank God, he didn't need the service. It's a bit strange, but a customer is a customer, right? Some people are superstitious." My blood ran cold. Every year since 1965, always in March. "That's right, 6 years in a row, it's almost become a tradition." He gave an awkward little laugh. "This year he hasn't come to cancel yet, but we're still in March, aren't we? The current contract is for..." He looked in the folder. March 15th, Monday. 6 years. He had been planning my death for 6 years, paying and canceling. Why this macabre cycle? What happened between March and April that made him change his mind? I thanked Mr. Jerome and left, my head spinning with this new information. Constance was waiting for me in the square. I told her what I discovered. She was pale. "We need to go to the police, Temperance." But I knew it wasn't that simple. Who was I in town? Just Walter's wife. And who was he? A respected merchant who employed people, who sold on credit to those in need, who contributed to the church festival. My word against his. "No, Constance, we need more evidence. We need to discover why he's doing this. There's something we don't know." On Sunday, Walter said he needed to go to Richmond to buy merchandise for the store. It was strange. He never went to buy merchandise on a Sunday. He usually sent the delivery boy during the week. "Can I go with you?" I asked, feigning innocence. "It's been a long time since I've been to the city." He became nervous. "No, Temperance. It's a business trip. It'll be tiring. I'll spend the whole day running after suppliers. It's not a pleasure trip." I insisted a bit, then pretended to give up. "All right, I'll take the opportunity to visit Constance." Then he seemed relieved. "Yes, go see your sister. I'll be back tonight." As soon as he left in the car, a blue Chevrolet that was his pride, I called Constance. My brother-in-law John had returned from his trip. We asked him to take us to Richmond in his truck. "We're going to follow Walter," I explained. John thought the idea was crazy, but Constance insisted. My sister is in danger, John. We followed the road to Richmond. John knew a faster route, so we managed to arrive before Walter. We waited at the entrance to the city. When the blue Chevrolet passed, we began to follow it, keeping our distance. Walter didn't go to the commercial center, as one would expect if he were really buying merchandise. He went to a residential neighborhood, Forest Hills. He stopped in front of a yellow house on Pine Street, number 427. We parked far away and observed. Walter got out of the car carrying gift packages and knocked on the door. A blonde woman, young, perhaps about 35 years old, opened the door. She was pregnant with a belly of at least 7 months. They hugged, kissed on the mouth. 3 little girls ran to hug Walter. "Daddy, Daddy's here!" John and Constance looked at me, shocked. I was petrified. Walter had another family, a pregnant woman, 3 daughters. How had I never known? How could I have been so blind? We observed for hours. Walter seemed completely at ease in that house. He played with the girls in the yard, helped the woman in the kitchen, behaved like a dedicated husband and father, exactly as he behaved with me and Vincent in Millfield. It was already getting dark when he finally left the house, hugged the woman for a long time, placed his hand on her belly, kissed each of the girls, got into the car, and departed. We waited a bit longer, then I decided I needed to talk to that woman. John and Constance tried to stop me. "It's dangerous, Temperance. She might tell him." But I was determined. I need to know who she is. I need to understand what's happening. I got out of the truck and walked to the yellow house, my heart beating so loudly I could hear it. I knocked on the door. The blonde woman answered, smiling. When she saw me, a stranger, the smile diminished a bit, but she remained polite. "Good afternoon. Can I help you?" "Do you know Walter Holloway?" I asked directly. She seemed confused for a moment, then smiled again. "My brother-in-law? Of course I know him. He just left. Are you a friend of his?" "Brother-in-law? What kind of story was this?" "I'm Temperance," I said, "Walter's wife." The color drained from her face. She held her belly as if protecting the baby. "Wife? No, you're mistaken. Walter is a widower. His wife, Catherine, died years ago." "Catherine? What, Catherine?" "No, I am Walter's wife, married for 22 years. We have a 17-year-old son, Vincent." She shook her head in disbelief. "No, no. Walter is my husband's brother, Anthony, who died 7 years ago. Walter has been taking care of us since then. We're a family." It was then that everything started to make sense. The March to April cycle, the funeral contracts, the slow poisoning. He was living a double life. And to have this other family, he needed to get rid of me. I properly introduced myself. Madeline, that was her name, invited me in. The girls were sleeping. In the living room, there were photos of her with a man I had never seen, presumably this Anthony, and also photos with Walter, all smiling, like a happy family. Madeline told her story. Her husband, Anthony, died in an accident in 1964. Walter, as a good brother, took on the responsibility of caring for her and the daughters. At first, it was just financial support, but over time, they fell in love. They had been together since 1965. The 3 girls called him Dad. The baby she was expecting was his. She thought that one day they would get married, but Walter said he needed to take care of his sick sister in Millfield. He always says he'll marry me when his sister dies. She has a weak heart. She won't last long, he says. The annual cycle finally made sense. Every time Madeline got pregnant, Walter prepared for my death, but when a girl was born, he canceled the plan. Why? What was he waiting for? Among his belongings at Madeline's house, we found letters from Walter's mother, Mrs. Beatrice, a known folk healer who died in 1969. She wrote about a condition for Walter to be able to exchange families. He would need to have a male child first. If he killed his wife before that, he would be cursed forever. Walter apparently took his mother's superstitions very seriously. We already had a son, Vincent. But with Madeline, he only had daughters, Christine, Mary, and Amy. Now Madeline was pregnant again, and he believed this time It would be a boy. That's why the set date, March 15th, 1971. He was sure that this time he would have his male child with Madeline, and I could finally die. I also discovered that Walter had embezzled more than $40,000 from the store over the years. He had forged my signature to sell 3 plots of land we owned. He bought the house for Madeline, paid for private school for the girls, supported 2 families, and to complete his plan, he had taken out a life insurance policy in my name worth $50,000, a fortune at the time. Money he would receive when I died of natural causes, the cardiac arrest following prolonged illness that Dr. Mitchell would certify. Madeline cried a lot when she understood the truth. She too had been deceived all these years. She wasn't Anthony's widow. In fact, this Anthony didn't even exist. She was the lover of a married man who planned to kill his wife. We returned to Millfield that night. I had all the evidence I needed. Now I knew what to do. On Monday, March 15th, the day marked for my death, I went to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Finnegan was a serious man with a thick mustache and a suspicious look. He listened to my story attentively, examined the documents I had brought, the obituary, the funeral contract, the bottle with the poisoned tea. "It's a very serious accusation, Mrs. Holloway. Mr. Holloway is a respected man in town." "I know, Sheriff Finnegan. That's why I brought all this evidence. And I have one more thing to tell you." I explained about Madeline, the house in Richmond, the 3 daughters, the baby on the way. The sheriff scratched his mustache thoughtfully. "If what you're saying is true, this man is a monster, but we need to catch him in the act." We developed a plan. I would return home normally. At night, I would pretend to drink the poisoned tea and fall ill. Dr. Mitchell would come, as arranged with Walter, to declare my death. Police officers would be hidden in the house to catch both of them in the act. Our housekeeper Mercedes agreed to help. She had always been suspicious of Walter. "He has snake eyes," she would say. Mercedes would be the witness, the person who would call Dr. Mitchell when I fell ill. That day was the longest of my life. Every minute seemed like an hour. Walter was nervous, restless, left early for the store, returned for lunch, which he barely touched. Then he left again. He returned at the end of the day with a package, a new dress for me. "For you to look even more beautiful," he said with a smile that now seemed macabre to me. In the afternoon, through the window, I saw Walter digging in the backyard. He was burying something. Later, we discovered it was a can with $20,000 in cash, his emergency reserve for when I died. He also said goodbye in a strange way to our son. "Vincent, always be a good man. Honor the family name." He hugged the boy for a long time, as if it were the last time. Vincent was confused. His father had never been one to show much affection. At night, after dinner, came the moment of the tea. Mercedes was in the kitchen witnessing everything. I saw when Walter put 3 pills in the tea, much more than normal. He wanted to make sure that this time I wouldn't wake up. "Your tea, Temperance. Drink it while it's hot." I took the cup, looked at that liquid that was supposed to kill me. 6 years he had waited for this moment. 6 years planning my death, living a double life, betraying me, slowly poisoning me. I brought the cup to my lips and pretended to drink. "It's good, Walter." "Thank you." He smiled, satisfied. "Go lie down. You look tired." I went to the bedroom, lay on the bed fully dressed. We began the staging. Mercedes rushed into the room after a few minutes. "Mr. Holloway, Mrs. Holloway is very ill." Walter came quickly. I pretended to have convulsions, to foam at the mouth, toothpaste mixed with water. He tried to show concern, but I saw the gleam in his eyes. It was working. "Mercedes, call Dr. Mitchell, quick." The doctor was already on alert. He arrived in less than 15 minutes. He looked at me superficially, without really examining me. He announced in a solemn voice, "I'm sorry, Walter. She's gone. Her heart finally gave out." Walter hugged the doctor, pretending to cry. "She suffered so much, doctor. Maybe it's better this way." Dr. Mitchell took the death certificate from his bag. It already had my name on it. He filled in the date and time. March 15th, 1971, 7:35 p.m., cause of death, cardiac arrest following prolonged illness. That's when Sheriff Finnegan entered the room, followed by 2 officers. "Freeze! Police!" The expression of shock on Walter's and Dr. Mitchell's faces was worth every second of those 3 years of suffering. I got up from the bed, alive and strong. How is this possible?" Walter stammered. "The tea?" "I didn't drink your poison, Walter. Not this time. And I know everything. Madeline, the girls, the life insurance, the embezzlement from the store, everything." The 2 were taken away in handcuffs. Walter still tried to deny everything, to say that I was crazy, that I had imagined it all, but the evidence was irrefutable. The poisoned tea, the fraudulent death certificate, the funeral contracts, the embezzlement of money, the forgery of my signature in the sale of the land. And so began my new life. A life I didn't expect to have. A life that was almost stolen from me by the man who swore to love and protect me. After that night, nothing would ever be the same again. Seeing Walter being taken away in handcuffs by the police, the look of desperation on his face when he realized that his 6-year plan had failed. That image never left my memory. The next day was a whirlwind. The news spread through the town like wildfire. Walter from the general store arrested for trying to kill his wife. No one talked about anything else. People looked at me with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. Some didn't believe it. They thought I had made it all up to get rid of my husband. Millfield was a small town in the 70s, and people liked to create their own versions of the facts. Vincent, my son, was the one who suffered the most with all of this. He was 17 in his last year of high school, dreaming of law school. Suddenly, he discovered that his father, whom he admired and respected, was a monster who planned to kill his own mother. And worse, that he had another family, other daughters. I remember my boy sitting on the porch, staring into nothingness, his eyes red from crying so much. "Why, Mom? Why did he do this to us?" I had no answers. I could only hug him and assure him that we would be okay somehow. The 2 of us against the world, if necessary. The trial began 3 months later, in June 1971. It was an event in town. The courthouse was on the central square, an old colonial-style building with high windows and a wooden floor that creaked with every step. The room was packed. It seemed that all of Millfield wanted to see the outcome of that story that seemed more like a radio drama. I was sitting in the first row, dressed in a simple navy blue suit, hair pulled back in a bun. I wanted to look dignified, strong. I wouldn't give anyone the pleasure of seeing me defeated. Beside me was Vincent, in a suit and tie, looking older than his 17 years. My sister Constance and her husband John were right behind us, offering support. On the other side of the room was the defense. Walter had hired Mr. Owens, the most expensive lawyer in the region. The store had been closed since the arrest, but apparently my husband still had hidden resources. Walter was sitting next to the lawyer, wearing an impeccable gray suit. He was thinner, with deep circles under his eyes, but still maintained that posture of a respectable man. Judge Mr. Paul Hamilton was known for his severity, a tall, thin man with gray hair and small glasses. When he entered, everyone stood up. I felt a knot in my stomach. That man would decide our future. The prosecutor, Mr. Harrison, presented the charges: attempted qualified homicide, embezzlement, forgery. For Dr. Mitchell, the charges were complicity and forgery. The doctor was sitting further away, head down, looking 10 years older. His wife didn't attend. The first witness was Sheriff Finnegan, who reported how he found the evidence and organized the sting operation. Then it was the turn of Mr. Jerome from the funeral home, confirming the 6 years of funeral contracts in my name, always paid in March and canceled in April. When the pharmacist, Mr. Anderson, testified about the phenobarbital found in the tea, there was a murmur in the audience. He explained in technical terms how that dose could cause cardiac arrest after prolonged use. Mercedes, our housekeeper, told how she saw Walter put the pills in the tea on that fateful night. 3 pills, she said. He crushed them well and mixed them in. Then he stood there, watching Mrs. Holloway drink with a strange smile on his face. The most tense moment was when Madeline entered to testify. She had given birth to a girl in May. Walter never had the male child he so eagerly awaited. She was thin, haggard, with deep circles under her eyes. People whispered, pointed. "It's her, the mistress." Madeline told her story with dignity. How she met Walter in 1964, shortly after becoming a widow. A lie of his, we discovered later. How he presented himself as a brother-in-law, then became a friend, confidant, and finally lover. How he supported the house, the daughters, promising a future together when his sick sister died. He told me he could only marry me when he had a male child. It was a promise he made to his mother before she died. And his sister, who I now know was his wife, had to die of natural causes, otherwise there would be a curse. The revelation about Walter's superstition caused nervous laughter in the audience. The judge called for silence. I looked at that woman and couldn't hate her. She too had been deceived, manipulated. She too was a victim of that man's cruelty. When it was my turn to testify, I felt the weight of all eyes. I told everything. The obituary found in the drawer, the poisoned tea, the investigation with my sister, the discovery of the other family in Richmond. I spoke about the years of dizziness, mental confusion, weakness, symptoms of the slow poisoning I had been suffering. "Why did your husband want to get rid of you, Mrs. Holloway?" the prosecutor asked. "To be with the other family, with the life insurance money, with the assets we had together. He embezzled more than $40,000 from the store over the years, forged my signature to sell land. He needed my life insurance to cover the holes he had made." The defense lawyer, Mr. Owens, tried to discredit me during cross-examination. He insinuated that I had mental problems, that I had made it all up out of jealousy. "Do you have proof of this alleged poisoning, beyond this single tea that you claim to have saved? Medical exams? Witnesses who saw you fall ill over the years? I have Mercedes' testimony, who saw him put the pills in the tea. I have the pharmacist's reports confirming the presence of phenobarbital. I have the funeral contracts, the fraudulent death certificate, and I have Dr. Mitchell, who confirmed my death without properly examining me." Mr. Owens changed strategy, trying to paint Walter as a responsible businessman concerned about the future of his family. "Your husband wasn't just being prudent? Many men take out life insurance. They plan funerals in advance. They plan for when they die, sir, not for when they kill their wives." There was a murmur of approval in the audience. The judge banged his gavel, calling for order. When Walter was finally called to testify, I could barely look at him. For 22 years, I had shared a bed with that man. I trusted him, believed his words, and all that time he was slowly killing me while supporting another family. Walter denied everything at first. He said I was confused, that I had misinterpreted the documents, that the tea was really to help me sleep. He said Madeline was just an acquaintance he helped out of charity. But when confronted with all the evidence, the embezzlement from the store, the forgeries, the sting operation with Dr. Mitchell, his story began to crumble. The prosecutor showed Walter's mother's letters, Mrs. Beatrice, where she talked about the condition for changing families. "Is it true that you believed you needed to have a male child with your mistress before you could kill your wife?" asked the prosecutor. Walter remained silent, looking at the floor. The judge insisted that he answer. "My mother, she had contact with the other side, knew things. Said I could only have a new life when I had a male child with the new woman, that if I killed Temperance before that, I would be cursed forever." The entire room was in shock. Until then, Walter had denied wanting to kill me. Now he was practically confessing, justifying his actions based on superstitions. The prosecutor continued relentlessly. "So, you admit you were planning to kill your wife?" Walter looked at me for the first time since the beginning of the trial. In his eyes was something I had never seen before. Fear, not of the trial, not of prison, but of me, of seeing me there alive, witnessing his downfall. I I just wanted to be happy with Madeline and the girls. Temperance would never give me a divorce. In our social position, in our circle, it would be a scandal. So, the solution was to kill her. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The truth was clear to everyone in that room. Dr. Mitchell was the last to testify. Unlike Walter, he confessed everything. How he was co-opted years before to monitor my illness. How he received money to certify that I had a weak heart. How he agreed to sign the death certificate without an adequate examination. I was in debt, he confessed, his voice breaking. I had gambling problems. Walter offered me a way out, said it would be better for everyone, that Mrs. Holloway was suffering with the disease. What disease, Dr. Mitchell? Asked the judge. Did Mrs. Holloway really have any heart condition? No, Your Honor. She was being poisoned. I knew that, and still agreed to participate. After 3 weeks of trial, the verdict was announced. The courtroom was even more crowded than on the first day. I sat upright, hands crossed on my lap, trying to maintain composure. Vincent held my hand, his sweaty palm showing his nervousness. Judge Paul Hamilton adjusted his glasses and read the sentence. Walter Holloway, for the crimes of attempted qualified homicide, embezzlement, and forgery, this court sentences you to 15 years in prison. There was a commotion in the room. Some applauded, others protested. Walter remained impassive, as if he already expected this result. Dr. Mitchell Owens, for the crimes of complicity in attempted homicide and forgery, this court sentences you to 8 years in prison. The doctor lowered his head in defeat. His wife, who had finally come to witness the verdict, cried silently in the last row. When the judge banged his gavel, I felt an immense relief. It wasn't joy. How could I feel joy seeing the father of my son, the man I once loved, being taken to prison? It was relief for having survived, for having discovered the truth in time, for having saved my own life. As I left the courthouse, I was approached by several reporters. The case had gained notoriety beyond Millfield, appearing in newspapers from Richmond and even from Washington, D.C. "Wife escapes macabre plan," the headline said. I didn't give interviews. I just wanted to go home with my son and start rebuilding our lives. At the trial, we discovered even more sordid details. Madeline's 3 daughters were really Walter's. She had never been married to this Anthony, who didn't even exist. Walter met her in 1964, just a year after our marriage, when she worked as a salesgirl in a store in Richmond. She got pregnant, and he invented the whole story of the widowed brother-in-law to justify his presence and financial support. His mother's superstition was the element that ironically saved me. Without this absurd belief, Walter would probably have killed me much earlier, without waiting years for the birth of a male child that never came. Madeline gave birth to her 4th daughter in May 1971, while Walter was already in jail. Another girl. After the trial, I managed to recover part of the embezzled money and Madeline's house in Richmond, which had been bought with money from land illegally sold by Walter. I didn't want the house for myself. I allowed Madeline and the girls to continue living there, as long as she paid a symbolic rent. After all, the children weren't to blame for their father's actions. The $50,000 life insurance policy was canceled. The money buried in the backyard, $20,000, was seized as evidence and later returned to me by court order. It was that money that helped us survive in the first months after the scandal. The store was on the verge of bankruptcy. Walter had embezzled so much money over the years that suppliers no longer wanted to do business with us. The debts accumulated. I decided to sell what remained of the establishment for a fraction of the original value. It was painful to see the work of so many years reduced to almost nothing, but we needed to move forward. In the months that followed, I discovered the true meaning of loneliness. Many people I considered friends pulled away, didn't want to be associated with the scandal. Others looked at me with suspicion, as if I had some blame for what happened. She must have done something for her husband to want to get rid of her, they whispered. The gossip about Madeline and the girls was also merciless. Mistress, homewrecker, tramp were some of the milder terms used, as if she had deliberately seduced a married man, as if she knew from the beginning that he was married, as if she too wasn't a victim of Walter's deceptions. But amid so much judgment and speculation, I also found unexpected support. Mercedes, our housekeeper, remained loyal. "You're a woman of steel, Mrs. Holloway. I'll stay by your side for as long as you need." Mr. Anderson, the pharmacist, always greeted me with a kind smile when I went to the pharmacy. "How are you feeling today, Mrs. Holloway? Health improving?" And there was Vincent, my son, my strength, my reason to continue. He finished high school that same year as one of the top students in his class, despite everything that happened. He was accepted to law school in Richmond with a partial scholarship for academic merit. Pride isn't a sufficient word to describe what I felt. "I'm going to become a prosecutor, Mom," he told me the night before leaving for the capital. "I'm going to ensure that people like my father don't go unpunished. I'm going to protect other women like you." And so began the next chapter of my life. A life I didn't expect to have. A life that was almost stolen from me, but that I recovered with courage, determination, and a bit of luck. The story of the obituary in the drawer, dated for 3 days later, spread. It became almost an urban legend in Millfield. Some people even came to visit me, curious to hear the details firsthand from the woman who escaped planned death. I kept that obituary, you know? I didn't throw it away, didn't burn it. I kept it as a reminder of the day I regained control of my own life, as proof that I survived. Years later, when I had overcome the trauma, I framed the document and hung it on the living room wall. My resurrection diploma, I joked with visitors. And Walter, he served only 3 years of his 15-year sentence. In 1974, he died in prison, victim of a massive heart attack at age 52. They said that in the last weeks he had been disturbed, talking to himself, screaming my name during the night, asking for forgiveness. Perhaps his mother's curse came true. After all, he was buried as a pauper because no one claimed the body. The year 1972 arrived with a different sun. I wasn't the same temperance as before, looking out the window of the house I still called mine. I was only 49 years old, but I felt like I had lived several lives in one. The mirror showed some new wrinkles, strands of white hair that weren't there before. Each mark told a story, a chapter of that ordeal I faced. After we sold the store, I needed to find a means of survival. The money wouldn't last forever, especially with Vincent in college. My son was in Richmond, sharing a boarding house room with another student, working as an assistant in the college library to supplement his scholarship. I sent what I could, often going without proper meals myself to ensure he had what he needed. One afternoon, rummaging through old boxes in the basement, I found my old Singer sewing machine, a gift from my mother when I got married. For years I had made clothes for myself and Vincent, small repairs for neighbors, but I had never thought of it as a profession. I sat in front of that black machine with golden details. I ran my fingers over its cold surface. I felt as if it were calling to me. Why not? I thought. Millfield was a town where few women worked outside the home, especially widows. That's how people saw me, although technically I wasn't a widow. But I needed money and had skill with needle and thread. I started sewing for acquaintances, a hem here, a simple dress there. Mercedes, who continued to come help me sometimes during the week, more for company than for the money I could barely pay, was my first advertiser. "Mrs. Holloway works miracles with that machine," she would say to anyone who would listen. At first, few people came. Some, out of curiosity, wanted to see the scandal woman up close, others out of pity. Few, really, for the sewing. The first true customer was Mrs. Josephine, an elderly lady who needed a dress for her granddaughter's wedding. "They say you charge less than the seamstress downtown," she explained, without looking me in the eyes. I made the dress with such care that Mrs. Josephine was amazed. "I've never had such a beautiful garment," she exclaimed when she saw herself in the mirror. After that, she brought her daughter, who brought the neighbor, who brought her friend. Gradually, my fame as a seamstress grew. I transformed the old dining room into an atelier. I bought fabrics, notions, a second more modern machine. My clientele grew week by week. It wasn't just repairs now. It was party dresses, suits for First Communion, bridal trousseaux. I discovered I had a special talent for catching the taste of the client, understanding what she wanted even when she couldn't explain. Still, life wasn't easy. The prejudice continued. There were houses where I wasn't welcome, families who preferred to pay more at the downtown seamstress than to have clothes made by me. Once, Mrs. Carmela, the bank manager's wife, canceled a ball gown she had ordered. My husband doesn't approve of me doing business with, well, you know. I knew. I was the woman who drove her husband to madness, the one who must have done something to deserve it. The rumors were cruel. They said I had lovers, that I had invented everything about Walter to keep the store money, that Madeline and I were accomplices to deceive him. People with whom I had lived for decades now crossed the street to avoid having to greet me. Vincent also suffered in Richmond. Even far from Millfield, the case was known. Once he came home with a black eye. "It's nothing, Mom," he said, minimizing it, but I found out later that a college colleague had provoked him. "Your father tried to kill your mother? I don't blame him if she's as annoying as you." That hurt me more than any poison. To see my son, so dedicated, so correct, suffering for mistakes he didn't commit. But Vincent was strong. He continued studying, standing out, making true friendships that didn't judge him for his family past. In 1973, I received an unexpected visit. Madeline was at my door, thin, haggard, with the youngest daughter in her arms. The other 3 girls waited at the gate, clinging to each other, looking fearfully at that strange house. "Mrs. Holloway," she said, her voice barely coming out, "forgive me for coming like this, but I have no one else to turn to." After Walter was imprisoned, her life collapsed. She lost the house that I had allowed her to continue occupying, not because of me, but because she couldn't pay even the symbolic rent. The money that Walter sent monthly stopped coming. She had to take the girls out of private school, sell furniture, jewelry. She ended up in a tenement in Richmond, working as a washerwoman to support the 4 daughters. "I'm not asking anything for myself," she assured, "but the girls, they're not to blame." I looked at those children. Christine, the oldest, at 10 years. Mary and Amy, twins at 8. And the youngest, Elizabeth, just 2 years old. The one Walter believed would be the boy that would permit my death. They had their father's eyes, the same dimple in the chin that Vincent had. They were my son's sisters, after all. "Come in," I finally said. "Let's talk." I gave Madeline what I could. Some money, clothes for the girls, a bit of food. It wasn't much, but it was what my situation allowed. I promised to help whenever possible, not for her, not for Walter, but for those innocent children. When I told Vincent about the visit, he was silent for a long time. "You did right, Mom," he finally said. "The girls are my sisters, no matter how they came into the world." At Christmas that year, I invited Madeline and the girls to spend it with us. It was strange at first, uncomfortable, tense, but children have a way of breaking the ice. Soon, Christine was helping to decorate the tree. The twins were running around the house playing hide and seek, and little Elizabeth slept peacefully in Vincent's old cradle that we kept in the attic. "I never thought we would be here like this," Madeline confessed, as we washed the dishes after dinner. "You have a big heart, Mrs. Holloway." "No, I don't. I just know that hatred sickens the soul, and I've suffered too much to carry that weight." In truth, helping Madeline and the girls was therapeutic for me. In some way, it gave meaning to all that suffering. It transformed a horrible story into something with a greater purpose. The year 1974 began with news that shook Millfield. Walter died in prison, victim of a heart attack. He was only 52 years old. I was officially informed as I was still legally his wife. They asked if I wanted to claim the body. I refused. Vincent wanted to go to the funeral, but almost no one appeared. The man who was once respected and admired in town died alone, abandoned, and was buried as a pauper. There wasn't money for a decent tomb. What remained of the fortune he illegally accumulated had been confiscated or spent on lawyers. "How do you feel?" asked Mercedes when she heard the news. I didn't know how to respond. I didn't feel joy. How could I rejoice at the death of someone I once loved, the father of my son? I also didn't feel sadness or regret, perhaps emptiness, a period at the end of a story that had already lasted too long. "I feel that I can finally move on," I answered, and I did move on. My small atelier prospered. I hired 2 assistants, young women who had a talent for sewing and needed work. We bought better fabrics, imported ones. I started making wedding dresses that became my specialty. There were brides who came from other towns just to have a temperance dress as my creations became known. The prejudice still existed but diminished little by little. Time has that power to heal, to smooth rough edges. When people saw my work, my dedication, how I rebuilt my life from scratch without asking for favors, admiration replaced judgment. In 1976, Vincent graduated from law school with distinction. The pride I felt that day, seeing my son in his gown receiving his diploma, can't be put into words. He was 22 years old, with the same handsome face as his father, but a character forged in the difficulties we faced. "It's for you, Mom," he said as he handed me the diploma. "Without you, without your strength, I would never have reached this point." Vincent was hired by a law firm in Richmond. He wanted me to move there, but I couldn't leave Millfield. Despite everything, it was my home. I knew every stone of the cobblestone streets, every tree in the square, the sound of the church bells marking the hours. And my atelier was there, built with so much sacrifice. The following years were of intense work and growth. I expanded the atelier, bought the neighboring house to expand the business. I had 6 seamstresses working with me now. We were known throughout the region. We made clothes for the best families, for graduations, weddings, important parties. I followed from afar the growth of Madeleine's daughters. She never married again. She said she had had her quota of men for a lifetime. She worked as a secretary at a school in Richmond, a modest but dignified position. The girls grew up beautiful and intelligent. Christine, the oldest, became a teacher. The twins followed different careers, one a nurse, the other a bank clerk. Elizabeth, the youngest, went to study fine arts. Vincent maintained contact with his half-sisters. It wasn't a close relationship. There was a lot of complicated history between them, but he cared, helped when necessary. He was a good man, my son. In 1979, I received an invitation to participate in a state fashion contest. I had never thought of myself as a designer, just as a seamstress, but I sent some pieces. To my surprise, I won 3rd place in the festive attire category. It was an honor, a recognition that I never expected. The reporter who interviewed me after the award was fascinated by my story. "You've overcome so many difficulties," she commented. "What's the secret?" "There is no secret," I replied. "Just keep moving forward, one day at a time. The world doesn't stop just because our heart is broken. We have to continue." The article was published in a Richmond newspaper with the title "From the Ashes to Success, The Incredible Story of Temperance Holloway." It was the first time they saw me beyond the scandal, no longer as the woman whose husband tried to kill her, but as the designer who overcame tragedy. The beginning of the 80s brought a new phase to my life. I was almost 60 years old. The atelier was established with a loyal clientele. I could have retired, lived quietly on the income, but work was my therapy, my way of expressing creativity, of feeling useful. It was during this time that I met Nathaniel. He was a widower, owner of a small grocery store near the church. A quiet man, of few words, always gentle. He started appearing at the atelier with small repairs, a loose button, an undone hem. Later, he began bringing chocolates, fresh fruits from his small farm on the outskirts of town. "For you and the ladies," he would say shyly, without looking me in the eyes. "You work so hard, you need energy." I didn't immediately perceive his intentions. I was so accustomed to living alone, to being independent, that the idea of a new relationship didn't even cross my mind. It was Mercedes who opened my eyes. "Mr. Nathaniel has his eye on you, Mrs. Holloway. Only the blind can't see it." I resisted at first. The ghost of Walter still hung over me. How to trust again? How to know if I wouldn't be deceived again? But Nathaniel was different, transparent as clean water, without secrets, without hidden agendas. In 1982, at 59 years old, I accepted his marriage proposal. It was a simple ceremony at the main church, just family and close friends. Vincent was my best man. He was already a district attorney then, a respected man, married to Teresa, a sweet woman who treated me like a mother. "Are you sure, Mom?" Vincent asked on the eve of the wedding. "You don't have to do this if you don't want to. We're fine like this." "I'm sure, son. I deserve this chance to be happy." And I was happy, genuinely happy, during the 13 years I lived with Nathaniel. He was the opposite of Walter. Simple, honest, without grand ambitions. Every night we had tea on the porch, talking about the day. On weekends, we went to his farm, where he grew orange trees and raised chickens. I learned to appreciate this quiet life, this mature love, without jolts. Nathaniel never tried to compete with the memories of the past, good or bad. He accepted that Walter was part of my history, that Vincent was a constant reminder of that first marriage. "What's past is past," he would say. "We're here now together, and that's what matters." I continued with my atelier, although at a slower pace. Nathaniel sometimes helped me. He learned to cut fabric, to organize orders. On nights when I stayed up late working on an urgent wedding dress, he would sit beside me, reading the newspaper, keeping me company. In 1995, Nathaniel died peacefully in his sleep at 78 years old. It was a different pain than what I felt with Walter. Not the shock of betrayal, the anger of injustice, but the deep sadness of losing a true companion. I cried a lot, but they were tears of gratitude for the years we spent together, not of regret or bitterness. "I was lucky," I told Vincent during the wake. "I knew the worst and the best that a marriage can be." And so, at 72 years old, I was a widow again, but this time I wasn't alone. I had my son, my daughter-in-law, my 3 adored grandchildren, Paul, Mark, and Julie. I had my atelier, my seamstress friends, the respect of the community. I had, above all, the certainty that I survived the unthinkable and built a dignified life on the other side. Sometimes, when I look at that framed obituary on the living room wall, I remember the young Temperance, the naive woman who blindly believed in her husband, who drank the poisoned tea every night without questioning. I hardly recognize her anymore. It's as if she were another person from another life. This experience transformed me, made me stronger, more cautious, but also more compassionate. It taught me that we can't control what others do to us, only how we react to what happens to us. They say that old age arrives gently, like a discreet visitor who occupies space in the house without making a fuss. For me, each wrinkle in the mirror tells a different story. Each white strand represents a lesson learned. When I lost Nathaniel in 1995, I thought my life had reached another period. I was 72 years old, an age when many people are already tired of living. But I discovered that there were still many chapters to be written. The first months after Nathaniel's departure were foggy. The house we shared for 13 years seemed too big, too quiet. The side of the bed where he slept remained tidy, as if he might return at any moment. I found myself preparing coffee for 2, setting aside the newspaper he liked to read in the morning. It was Vincent who suggested I move to Richmond. "Come live with us, Mom. The house is big. The kids would love to have their grandmother nearby." My son was already a 41-year-old man, a respected prosecutor, a family man. Paul, the oldest of my grandchildren, was 15 years old, Mark, 13, and Julie, the little one, only 8. I resisted at first. Millfield was my refuge, my safe harbor. Every stone of that colonial town held a piece of my history. The sewing atelier, though reduced in recent years, was still my space of creation. How could I abandon all this? But loneliness is a treacherous companion in old age. I began to notice small lapses in memory, greater fatigue when climbing the stairs at home, the fear of getting sick and having no one nearby. Mercedes, my faithful companion of so many years, had moved to live with her daughter in Washington, D.C. The old atelier assistants had followed their own paths, opening their own businesses. In 1996, I finally made the decision. I sold the house in Millfield, donated the sewing machines to a local vocational school, kept only the most special fabrics and some precious mementos. Among them, the framed obituary, my resurrection diploma, as I used to joke. The move to Richmond was less traumatic than I imagined. Vincent and Teresa's house was spacious, in a tree-lined neighborhood. I got a room on the ground floor with a view of the garden, decorated with a care that moved me. Teresa had put my photographs on the walls, my favorite books on the shelf, even a small sewing dummy in the corner, for when inspiration strikes, Mrs. Holloway. Living with my grandchildren brought a new energy to my life. Paul, serious and studious like his father, always asked me to tell stories from my youth. Mark, more playful, taught me to play video games. Imagine that, a lady over 70 pressing buttons on a television. And Julie, Julie, that girl was pure light. She spent hours watching me sew, wanting to learn all the stitches, enchanted with every colorful scrap. Grandma, tell me again how you escaped from the evil grandpa, Julie would sometimes ask. That's how she referred to Walter, the evil grandpa, as opposed to Nathaniel, the good grandpa she barely knew. Vincent didn't like me talking about this subject with the children, but I believed that the truth, even painful, was better than silence. Of course, I adapted the story for children's ears, transforming it almost into a fairy tale where the princess saves herself. Your grandfather wasn't evil, Julie, I would explain. He was a sick man who made terrible choices. But without him, your father wouldn't exist, and without your father, you wouldn't be here. So, even in bad things, we can find blessings. In 1998, I received a visit that caught me by surprise. Elizabeth, Madeline's youngest daughter, knocked on our door one Sunday afternoon. She was 27 years old, a beautiful young woman with dark hair and lively eyes. Walter's eyes. She had graduated in fine arts and came to invite us to her first painting exhibition. Aunt Tempe, she called me that, although technically I was something like a stepmother. I really wanted you to come. Your stories have always inspired me. The exhibition took place in a small gallery in downtown Richmond. The theme was rebirth, a series of paintings that portrayed women in moments of transformation. The most impactful for me was a large canvas in shades of blue and gold, showing an older woman emerging from turbulent waters with an ancient paper in her hand, clearly a reference to my obituary. This painting is called Temperance, Elizabeth explained to the guests. It's a tribute to the woman who could have been just a victim but chose to be a survivor. A woman who, even having all the reasons to hate, chose compassion, including toward me and my sisters, who were daughters of my father's other family. I couldn't hold back the tears. I had never thought that my story could inspire art, that my suffering transformed into strength could touch other people in this way. Madeline was also there, now a 62-year-old lady, gray hair, face marked by time. We hugged for a long time, without words. What words could express the unlikely journey that connected us? In the early 2000s, when I was already over 80 years old, I discovered a new passion: storytelling. It began on an ordinary afternoon when the community center near Vincent's house organized an event for the elderly in the neighborhood. They called it Afternoon of Memories. Each person should share a memorable life experience. When it was my turn, I told about the day I found my own obituary. I spoke without drama, without self-pity, just relating the facts as they happened. When I finished, the room was in absolute silence. A lady approached me afterward, squeezed my hands between hers. "Mrs. Holloway, You gave me courage today. If you survived that, I can survive what I'm going through." Soon I was invited to other events, schools, women's groups, even a lecture at the college where Paul, my oldest grandson, was studying psychology. My theme was always the same: resilience. How to survive when life tries to bury you. How to transform betrayal into a new beginning. How to forgive without forgetting. In 2005, at 82 years old, I participated in a documentary about domestic violence. The director was a young filmmaker who heard my story during one of these lectures. "Your experience needs to be recorded, Mrs. Holloway. It can help many women who are going through similar situations today." I confess I was apprehensive. One thing was to speak to small groups. Another was to expose my life to a larger audience. What if people from Millfield saw it? The few who still remembered the scandal, who perhaps preferred that story to remain buried. "Mom," said Vincent when I shared my doubts, "you survived an attempted murder. Do you really think you wouldn't survive a few malicious comments? Besides, who cares what they think? Your story could save lives." The documentary Obituary won awards at smaller festivals. It was shown in schools, community centers, police stations specialized in serving women. I received letters and emails. Yes, I learned to use a computer at 80 years old, thanks to the patience of my grandchildren. From women who identified with parts of my story, women who were trapped in abusive relationships and found the courage to leave. Women who survived and now sought to rebuild their lives, as I did. In 2008, a scare. I was diagnosed with breast cancer. At 85 years old, many would have given up fighting. "At my age, is it worth going through surgery, chemotherapy?" I asked the doctor. He smiled, a gentle smile that reminded me of Nathaniel. "Mrs. Holloway, you survived a husband who tried to kill you for years. Do you really think you're going to surrender to a few rebellious cells?" I faced the treatment with the same determination that I faced all the challenges in my life. It was difficult, painful. There were days when I wanted to give up, but I looked at the framed obituary now hanging on the wall of my room and thought, I've already beaten death once, I'll beat it again. And I did. Against all expectations, the cancer went into remission. "You have an extraordinary life force," commented the oncologist during a follow-up consultation. "I'd like to know what your secret is." "There is no secret, doctor, just the decision to continue living one day at a time." In 2012, I turned 90 years old. My grandchildren organized a surprise party that brought together people from all phases of my life. Former clients of the Millfield Atelier, neighbors, Madeline's daughters. She herself had passed away in 2009. Young people who knew me through the lectures and the documentary. A lifetime condensed in that hall, decorated with yellow flowers, my favorites. Paul, now a respected psychologist, gave a moving speech. My grandmother taught us that surviving isn't just continuing to breathe. It's transforming pain into wisdom, fear into courage, betrayal into a new beginning. It's looking back without resentment and forward without fear. At that moment, looking at all those smiling faces, I felt immense gratitude for the life I had. It wasn't the life I had planned. It certainly wasn't the life I dreamed of when I married at 26 years old to Walter. It was much more difficult, but also much richer in experiences, in growth, in meaning. The following years brought the natural limitations of advanced age. I started using a cane, then a walker. My hearing got weaker. I needed a hearing aid. My eyesight no longer allowed me to sew, although my fingers still missed the touch of fabrics, the movement of the needle. But my mind remained lucid, memories intact. I continued telling my story whenever I could, now mainly to my great-grandchildren who were starting to arrive. They looked at me with those wide eyes of amazement when I told them about the obituary in the drawer, about the poison tea, about how I transformed an improvised sewing atelier into a prosperous business. "Grandma Temperance is a superhero," declared Peter, Paul's son, at 6 years old, after hearing a simplified version of my saga. I laughed a lot at that. A superhero with white hair, deep wrinkles, and trembling hands. What would that power be? Perhaps the true superpower, the ability to fall and get up, to be broken and still remain whole, to face the worst that life can offer and still find reasons to smile, to create, to love. In 2020, when the pandemic isolated the world, I found myself confined at home like everyone else. At 97 years old, I was considered a very high-risk group. It was a difficult period of amplified loneliness, of constant fear, but also of unexpected connections. Julie, my granddaughter who inherited my love for sewing, began to record our conversations, to document my stories. "I'm doing this so that your great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren know your story, Grandma," she explained, "so that they know where they came from." It was during these recorded conversations that I revisited almost forgotten details of my journey. The superstition of Mrs. Beatrice, Walter's mother, which ironically saved me. He could only exchange families after having a male child, and with Madeline, he only had girls. Dr. Mitchell, the accomplished doctor, who died in prison in 1979, repentant to his last breath. Mercedes, my faithful housekeeper, who testified against Walter, even knowing she would be rejected by many families in town after that. "You know what impresses me most about your story, Grandma?" asked Julie during one of these sessions. "It's not just that you survived, but how you chose to live afterward. How you helped Madeline and the girls. How you rebuilt your life through sewing. How you found love again with Grandpa Nathaniel." I smiled, touched by my granddaughter's sensitive observation. "Life is made of choices, my dear. I could have chosen hatred, bitterness, isolation. Many would have understood, even approved. But what kind of victory would that be? Walter would have managed to kill me in another way, killing my ability to trust, to love, to find beauty even after horror. Today, at 75 years old, I look back and see a life that was worth living, not for the moments of pain, which were many, but for the strength I found to overcome them, for the wonderful son I raised, for the grandchildren who fill me with pride, for the great-grandchildren who are beginning their own journey in a world so different from the one in which I grew up. The obituary remains on the wall of my living room, yellowed by time and framed in a simple wooden frame. New visitors always ask about it, intrigued by this unusual decorative object. "It's my trophy," I explain, smiling. "My proof that we can rewrite our destiny, even when others try to write it for us." Sometimes I wonder what Walter would think if he knew I'm here, more than 50 years after that night when he believed he would finally get rid of me. That I not only survived, but flourished. That I transformed each scar into learning, each fall into an impulse to rise stronger. I think he wouldn't understand. Men like Walter rarely understand the strength that exists in kindness, in persistence, in the ability to forgive without forgetting. It's a silent strength, not flashy like violence or intimidation. A strength that sustains, that builds, that transforms. The true strength that moves the world. If you're watching this video now, I want to thank you for your company up to this point. If you can, please leave your like and subscribe to the channel. I'm curious to know where you're watching from. So, leave your city in the comments. Now let's continue our conversation, because I still have many things to share with you. When we reach 75 years, as I am now in 2025, life becomes a treasure chest of memories. Each drawer we open contains stories, some sweet, others bitter. The interesting thing is to notice how these moments intertwine, forming the unique tapestry that is our existence. As a seamstress for so many years, I've always liked this metaphor. Life as a fabric that we weave with the threads we are given, some bright, others opaque, but all necessary for the final design. What have I learned from my journey? What lessons do I carry in my heart after all I've lived through? These are questions that my grandchildren and great-grandchildren always ask me. Paul, my psychologist grandson, says that my story should be studied as a case of extraordinary resilience. But I don't see myself as someone extraordinary. I see myself only as a woman who, faced with the choice between giving up or moving forward, chose the more difficult path, that of continuing to live, not just existing. One of the greatest lessons I learned was about forgiveness. Not that sugary forgiveness from self-help books that advise forgetting the harm done to us. No. True forgiveness is much more complex and painful. It is recognizing the evil in its full extent, feeling the pain completely, and still choosing not to let that pain define who you are or become the center of your existence. Did I forgive Walter? It's a difficult question. I can't say I forgot what he did, that I erased from memory the years of slow poisoning, the betrayal with Madeline, the plan to kill me on that March 15th, 1971. These memories are engraved in me like scars. But I learned not to allow hatred to occupy space in my heart, not for him, but for myself. I remember a conversation I had with Vincent in 2010, when he was already 56 years old, gray hair at his temples, lines of expression that reminded me so much of his father. We were sitting in the garden of his house, watching the grandchildren play. "Mom," he asked, "do you still think about him? About your father?" I reflected for a moment before answering. "I think about him, son, not with anger or bitterness like before. I think about him with a kind of sad understanding. Walter was a man torn in half, one side capable of loving, of being a good father, good husband, the other side consumed by greed, by selfishness, by his mother's superstitions. In the end, the dark side won." Vincent nodded thoughtfully. "I know that his relationship with his father's memory was always complicated. How to love someone who tried to kill your mother? How to honor a man who lived a life of lies? Over the years, I saw my son struggle with these contradictory feelings. His career choice as a prosecutor wasn't by chance. It was his way of establishing order in a world that, for him, had revealed itself early on as chaotic and unjust. Another lesson I learned was about trust. After what I experienced with Walter, it would have been natural to build walls around myself, to never trust anyone again, especially men. Many women who have gone through similar traumas follow this path, and I don't judge them. Each person deals with pain in the way they can. But for me, closing myself off to new connections would be like letting Walter win, even after his death. It would be allowing the poison he literally put in my teacup to also poison my soul, my ability to love and be loved. That's why, when Nathaniel entered my life with his simple gestures and quiet kindness, I decided to give my heart a chance. It wasn't easy. In the first few months, I analyzed his every word, looked for hidden intentions in every gesture. If he said he needed to travel, I imagined another hidden family. If he brought me tea, I looked at the cup with suspicion. Nathaniel noticed, of course. He was a sensitive man, despite his rustic appearance as a small-town merchant. One night, after seeing me hesitate before the tea he had prepared, he sat down beside me and took my hands in his. "Tempe," he said with that deep, calm voice, "I understand your fear. I know your story. The whole town knows. I can't promise I'll never hurt you. We're human, and humans make mistakes, but I can promise that I will never, ever betray you on purpose or do anything to harm you. If you can't believe that now, that's okay. I'll prove it with actions, not words, and I'll wait as long as necessary." That conversation was a turning point. Not that it eliminated all my fears, but it gave me permission to feel these fears without guilt, to advance at my own pace. Nathaniel kept his promise. For 13 years, he was the most loyal, loving, and present companion anyone could wish for. His patience taught me that trusting again isn't an act of naivety, but of courage, and that this courage is rewarded when placed in the right person. A third lesson, perhaps the most important, was about self-sufficiency. When I found myself alone at 48, with a son to raise, without a formal profession, without experience in the job market, despair knocked at my door. What would become of me? How would we survive? In the early 70s, in a small town in Virginia, the options for a separated woman, or almost widow, as they saw me, were limited. That's when my old Singer sewing machine transformed into much more than an object. It became my lifeline. Each stitch, each hem, each pattern was a step toward independence. I discovered I had talent, that I could transform fabrics into dreams, that my hands could create beauty, even when my heart was broken. The sewing atelier wasn't just a means of financial survival, but also emotional. There, among fabric scraps and pins, between dress fittings and conversations with clients, I rediscovered my worth as a person, as a woman, as a creator. I learned that I didn't need validation from a man, husband, father, brother, to fully exist in the world. This self-sufficiency gave me the freedom to choose to be with Nathaniel years later. Not out of necessity, not out of fear of loneliness, but out of genuine love. The difference is fundamental. I chose to be with him because I wanted to, not because I needed to. And that choice made all the difference in the quality of our relationship. Over the decades, I've seen many changes in society. When I was young, a separated woman was practically a social pariah. Divorce was only legalized in the United States in the 1970s, years after my personal drama. Women had few professional options, little financial independence, little voice. Today, I see my granddaughters and great-granddaughters with opportunities I never dreamed of having. Julie, my granddaughter who inherited my love for sewing, didn't limit herself to learning from her grandmother. She graduated in fashion design, opened her own atelier, has clients across the country. Marina, my 14-year-old great-granddaughter, already talks about becoming an aerospace engineer. And the most beautiful thing is that nobody finds this strange or impossible. It doesn't mean that all problems have been solved. Violence against women, which I experienced in its most extreme form, still exists, still destroys lives. But today, there are more awareness, more resources, more support networks. When I see reports about women's shelters, safe houses, laws like the Violence Against Women Act, I think about how my story could have been different if these resources had existed in 1971. Another precious lesson was about the importance of female friendships. Mercedes, my housekeeper who became a friend and confidant, was fundamental in the darkest moments. Constance, my sister, stood by my side in the investigation that saved my life. The seamstresses who worked with me at the atelier formed a support network without which I would have collapsed many times. Men like Walter count on the silence of victims, witnesses, society. Breaking this silence, sharing experiences, supporting other women in similar situations, is an act of resistance and healing. That's why, when I was invited to participate in that documentary in 2005, even at 82 years old and with all the insecurities of age, I accepted. That's why I continue telling my story, even if it's sometimes painful to relive certain moments, because I know that somewhere a woman might be listening and finding the courage she needs to leave an abusive situation, to start over, to believe that there is life, and good life, after trauma. The relationship with Madeline's daughters was another important chapter in my learning journey. At first, I admit, it was difficult to look at those girls without seeing Walter's betrayal stamped on their faces, especially because Christine, the oldest, was the spitting image of her father, the same eye shape, the same dimpled chin. But they weren't to blame. They were victims just as much as I was, perhaps more so, because they were defenseless children in the midst of that turmoil. When Madeline knocked on my door in 1973, desperate and without resources to feed her daughters, I had to make a decision. Would I let resentment speak louder, or would I extend a hand to those in need? I chose compassion, not out of innate virtue, but because I had already suffered too much from the cycle of hurt and vengeance. I helped as I could financially, yes, but also emotionally, recognizing the humanity of that other woman who, like me, had been deceived by Walter. Over the years, we built an unlikely but genuine relationship. We weren't exactly family, but we were more than acquaintances. We shared a bond forged in common suffering. When Madeline died in 2009, I went to her funeral. Her daughters, now mature women with their own families, embraced me with tears in their eyes. "Thank you for not hating us," said Christine. "It would have been so easy, so understandable if you had hated us." I had no immediate response. How to explain that hatred is a luxury we can't afford when we really want to live? That holding grudges is like drinking poison expecting the other person to die? That learning to separate people from their actions is one of the most difficult and most liberating skills we can develop? Perhaps the deepest lesson I learned was about finding purpose in pain. I don't believe we suffer to learn lessons. That would be a very cruel view of the world. But I do believe we can extract meaning even from the most terrible experiences, transforming them into something that benefits not only ourselves, but also others. For me, this purpose came in many forms. Through the sewing atelier that not only supported me financially, but also brought beauty and creativity to my life. Through raising my son, who grew to be an upright and just man, very different from his father. Through the lectures and the documentary that allowed my story to inspire other people. And perhaps most importantly, through the daily decision to live fully, with joy and gratitude, despite what I experienced, or perhaps because of it. Today, sitting on Vincent's porch, watching the trees we planted together years ago, I feel a peace I never imagined possible during the nights of anguish after discovering the obituary in the drawer. It's not a naive peace that ignores the evil existing in the world. It's a mature peace that recognizes darkness but chooses to focus on light. When children or teenagers come to interview me for school projects about resilience or oral history, they always ask, "Mrs. Holloway, do you have any regrets?" I reflect deeply before answering. Regret is a complex emotion. Do I regret not noticing the signs earlier? The years lost with Walter? Not being more cautious, more suspicious? My only regret, I finally answer, is not realizing my own worth earlier. I spent years believing that my role was to be a wife and mother, that my identity was tied to a man, that my dreams were secondary. The tragedy I experienced forced me to awaken, to recognize my strength, my capacity. But how many women live their entire lives without this awakening? That's my only regret, having almost needed to die to really start living. The framed obituary on the wall is more than a curiosity, more than small talk for visitors. It's a daily reminder that our end is always lurking, but also that we can cheat fate, rewrite our story, be reborn from the ashes like the phoenix of ancient legends. Life is short, even when long, and mine, at 75 years, has far exceeded what Walter planned for me. Each day is a gift, each dawn a silent victory. I don't live in fear of death. I've already faced it head on. I've already read my own obituary. When death comes, whether in months or years, it will just be the period at the end of a story that was worth telling. And if there's a message I'd like to leave for those watching this video, it's this. No matter how dark the night seems, the sun will rise. No matter how deep the well into which you've fallen, there's always a path to the surface. No matter how many times they've tried to extinguish your light, you carry within you the divine spark that no one can extinguish without your permission. As says that phrase I embroidered and hung in my room next to the obituary. Died naive, reborn wise. I hope my story helps someone somewhere find the courage for their own rebirth, because in the end, that's the true revenge against those who try to destroy us, to live and live well against all expectations. Thank you for listening to me until this point. If this story touched your heart, leave your comment, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need to hear that there is always hope, even in the most desperate situations. A warm hug from this 75-year-old grandmother, who is very proud to be able to tell her story to you today.